For the 1,600 people who crowded into the lobby of the Kansas City Hyatt Regency on July 17, 1981, the night was young. After a sweltering day with temperatures pushing beyond 30 Celsius, those in attendance were looking forward to another of Hyatt's famous tea dances. An elegant soiree of fun and dancing played out against the splendid environs of the hotel's spectacular lobby with its multi-story atrium and collection of raised walkways. Known as skywalks, these three walkways were among the lobby's most striking features. So striking it seemed that they became a focal point for the evening. Dozens of people wandered up there as the festivities got underway, keen to get a better view and to marvel at the architectural wonder of the space. One of those people was Sally Firestone. Sally recalled very little of that evening, other than that just after 7 p.m, she was stood with her friend on the Hyatt's second floor walkway, watching a dance competition unfold on the floor below. "I was on the edge of the skywalk," Sally said later. "I heard a crack, and that's all I remember." The crack that Sally heard was the support rod of the fourth floor walkway giving way. That walkway was now in free fall, and it was coming down directly on Sally's head. In seconds, the fun and excitement of the evening had evaporated as tons of concrete, glass, and rubble fell onto the dance floor below. The subsequent rescue would take all night, leaving hundreds of people severely traumatized. Many of the emergency responders quit their jobs after that night, unable to relive what they had witnessed. Despite the efforts of these rescuers, 114 people lost their lives and hundreds were injured. Many of these injuries were life-changing. For Sally Firestone herself, her wounds were catastrophic. "My neck was broken, one leg was broken, the other had a hairline fracture," she said. "And I lost most of my blood through scalp lacerations. I was told they didn't really expect me to live." Sally was paralyzed. She would spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. As investigators tried to piece together what happened, they uncovered a frightening process of lax safety, superficial inspections, and systematic corner cutting. The eagerness to fast-track the construction had cost more than 100 lives and ruined countless others. I'm Andy Roberts, and this is the story of those failures and how they led to tragedy. But more than that, it's a human story. A story of heroic rescue attempts, and a story of 114 people who went out for an evening of fun and frivolity with friends and loved ones to never come home. For 49 years, the iconic Art Deco structure of the Kansas City Power and Light Building was KC's tallest. But by the late 1970s, Missouri's largest city was changing. The modern Kansas City would embrace its past and its heritage, but it would also look forward with optimism to the future. And this meant new ideas, new projects, and a new skyline. That new skyline arrived in 1980 when the 153-meter tall Hyatt Regency opened for business. Kansas City had a new tallest building, a brand new hotel, and a convention center that Missourians would really be proud of. This was the cause for celebration. After all, hopes were high for the economic boost it would bring to the city. An official grand opening party that November ran all night and continued right through to lunchtime the following day. But behind the scenes, there were problems. Construction on the towering new building had been far from smooth. On October 14, 1979, long before the hotel was due to open, disaster struck. A huge section of the atrium roof collapsed, more than 2,700 square feet in total area. There were no injuries except for the injured pride of Jack D. Gillum and his associates, the engineering firm handling the project. Keen to spare their own blushes, the engineers worked around the clock to get the project back on track. This meant moving faster than usual, carrying out safety checks and assessments in double quick time. They succeeded with minimal delay. The hotel was ready for action, and in July 1980, the Hyatt Regency was open. Missourians were right to be optimistic. Kansas City had become one of the most popular venues in the US for trade conventions, bringing revenue, employment, and opportunity to a city that badly needed it. As a town that struggled with economic depression received its promising boost, little things like a roof collapse were quickly forgotten. Casey's conventions calendar were constantly booked up, and the money was flowing in. Let's move forward 1 year. It's now July 17th, 1981, and the Hyatt Regency is hosting 2 more of those conventions. One for florists, another for household brush and mop salespeople. On top of this, the Hyatt's Tea Dance is about to begin, along with a nationwide dance competition accompanied by a full orchestra. The place is packed, and visitors from across the country marvel at its jaw-dropping design. In the hotel's spacious, airy atrium, the 37-meter-long skywalk supports dozens of excited guests as they survey the dance floor below. The orchestra members seem to be enjoying themselves as much as the dancers. They trade improvisations and solos, feeding off the energy from the crowd. When they launch into Duke Ellington's Satin Doll, the breezy jazz can't help but bring a smile to the faces of those in attendance. Feet are tapping, heads are nodding, and out on the dance floor, couples wheel their way around. The squares of paper pinned to the dancers' back bearing their competition numbers flutter as they go by. Eager for a better view, more attendees make their way to the walkways that crisscross the atrium. There are 3 of these sky bridges in total, one on the 2nd floor, one on the 3rd, and one on the 4th. But they're offset. While the 3rd floor skywalk is slightly out of line, the 4th and 2nd floor structures are arranged on top of one another. Jan Galway is in town from Jacksonville, Florida. Some of her family are competing as dancers, but not Jan. 6 months pregnant, she's here for some rest and relaxation. Though the air-conditioned lobby is cooler than outside, she finds the heady atmosphere on the atrium floor just a little stifling. So she wanders to the 4th-story skywalk to get a better view and escape the crowd. At just after 7 p.m., she is one of around 40 people on the uppermost walkway. But as she searches for a vantage point, she has a strange sensation. The walkway seems to slip. In Jan's words, it is just a slight lurch, like an elevator. Moments later, the structure falls altogether, plummeting directly down onto the 2nd floor skywalk where Sally Firestone stands with her friends. Down below, the orchestra sits on its raised platform. Trombone player Richard Cobble just finished his solo when he raised his eyes to the skywalk, and to his horror, he sees what's unfolding. Cobble sees the upper skywalk crashing down upon the one below. As the orchestra scurries for cover from the platform, the lower walkway splits into 2. Both walkways fall, and in Cobble's words, like a drawbridge in reverse. Directly beneath the 2 walkways are hundreds of unsuspecting victims. More than 60 tons of debris collapses sickeningly on top of them. For a moment or two, no one can quite process what they're witnessing. But then, the grim wailing of the injured and the trapped cuts through the buffering layers of shock. People are still pinned in there, and they are screaming for their lives. The Hyatt Regency's location in the Crown Center, downtown Kansas City, undoubtedly saved lives. No time was wasted in raising the alarm, and rescuers arrived on the scene almost immediately. Through the panic and confusion that had taken over the Regency's lobby, it's difficult to build up an exact timeline. It seems the first to respond were paramedics who were already in the area. They reached the building at 7:08 p.m., just 3 minutes after the collapse. Records from Kansas City's dispatchers show us that 911 calls began immediately. By 7:11 p.m., around 6 minutes after the collapse, 5 ambulances were on their way to the scene, with the first arriving just a minute later. All of the emergency services on their way to the scene feared the worst. But even that did not prepare them for what they found there. Hundreds of people were trapped beneath the debris, many of them critically injured. Panicked family members and loved ones are trying desperately to pull them free, but to no avail. Among the first to arrive was Vince Ortega, a 26-year-old officer with the Kansas City Police Department. He described rushing into the lobby and immediately encountering a dead body. The rubble had flattened the body out, Ortega remembered. I could only tell it was a woman because she had a dress on. Ortega and his colleagues got to work. He and a fellow officer attempted to pull a man from beneath the rubble, only for the victim's arm to detach from his body. The trauma was simply too much for Ortega's colleague. He walked out of the door, Ortega said. He actually never came back. He never returned to the police department. Ortega's colleague was one of several first responders who struggled with severe PTSD. Many never returned to work after the horrors of that night. There was another problem for those first responders. When those walkways came down, they tore through the very fabric of the building. This meant live electrical wires were suddenly exposed. The risk of electrocution was high. Water pipes were also ripped open, pouring their contents down into the atrium, while the hotel's emergency sprinkler system kicked into action. An already complex situation became almost impossibly difficult. Dr. Joseph Wakel was among the first medical personnel to arrive. He described the scene in his own words. You have to understand the chaos and the carnage that had gone on in that lobby. The water was flowing, the mains were cut when the skywalks collapsed. Electrical wires were hanging and arcing and sparking. There were no lights. The atrium had become a disorienting nightmare, and the floor of the lobby was rapidly disappearing beneath the rising water. With so many people pinned at ground level, those who had survived the initial collapse were now in danger of drowning. Doors and entrances were smashed open to let some of the water out, while hotel employees scrambled to shut off the supply. Finally, the flow of water was stemmed. In the darkness, voices called out to one another. The screams of the wounded melded with the yells of the rescuers. Coordination became almost impossible. Over the coming hours, a team of firefighters and construction workers would fight their way through the frightening tangle of enmeshed debris. Jackhammer crews were brought in to get people trapped deep within the rubble. But this had to be halted when it became clear that the debris was piled like a house of cards, each piece supporting another piece in the jumble. If the pile slipped, even just a few inches, this would result in even further injury or even death. Cranes were wheeled up to the lobby, but the large glass walls blocked their way. Every minute was now the difference between life and death, so rescuers smashed through the glass to give the cranes access. With the rubble stabilized, the process began again. Around 11 p.m., Kathleen Odell and Bob Linder arrived from local paper, the News Leader. By now, the sweltering summer sky had grown stormy and fractious, and rain began to fall. On arrival, Odell and Linder remembered rows of police lights glistening beneath the downpour. But to tell the story of what had happened, they'd need to get inside. Fortunately, Odell had a plan. She produced a box of donuts and began offering them to personnel in the cordon. Odell and Linda were able to walk right up to the building and then enter, but they may have wished that they hadn't. What they encountered in there was truly shocking. With each new section of skywalk that was lifted out by the cranes, a new set of crushed bodies emerged from the wreckage. There were so many by now that rescue workers had to commandeer a staging area that had been set up for the florist's convention, using that as a temporary morgue. Odell remembered several inches of water still sloshing about on the lobby floor, stained a deep red with blood. Leaves of sheet music from the orchestra drifted around on top of it, while helium balloons bobbed about overhead. Linda, the news leader's photographer, found it too traumatic to look at the scene directly. I kind of find when things are uncomfortable, it's easier to look through the camera viewfinder and keep my head there than to look around, he said. It was around then that a firefighter told Odell a harrowing story that had become emblematic of the Hyatt tragedy's horror, and of the lengths that so many people went through to save the wounded that night. They'd encountered a man in the rubble, the firefighter said, who was hurt so badly he needed immediate evacuation. But his leg was pinned, mangled between slabs of concrete. He was a bartender at the hotel and he'd been caught by the walkways when they came down. He was still conscious. They informed him of what needed to be done. At first, he pleaded with them not to remove his leg. But as it became clear this was his only chance of survival, he agreed. A surgeon was found, and morphine, and finally a chainsaw. Right there and then, on the lobby floor, they administered the morphine and began sawing through the man's leg. While they succeeded in freeing him, the man didn't survive. In other cases, swift decisions had to be made. If a patient couldn't be saved, they should be made as comfortable as possible, while those who might be saved became the priority. I had to give pain medication to ease the suffering of one dying lady, Dr. Wackel remembered. Her family was screaming in my face for me to do something. I remember every single time I had to do that. To this day, I pray I did the best for each person. The rescue continued all night. By the morning, 111 people had died at the scene. 3 others would die in hospital. More than 200 people suffered injuries, and many of these injuries were life-changing. Even those who escaped physical injuries suffered lasting psychological and emotional wounds. So, how had this happened, and who is to blame? The tragedy at the Hyatt Regency was caused by just a few steel rods intended to secure the atrium's free walkways. The original design called for rods extending all the way from the second-floor walkway to the ceiling. But late in the project, this was deemed too complex. The developers instead switched to a simpler design. They attached the second-floor walkway's rods to the base of the 4th-floor walkway above it. With the stroke of a pen, the entire load profile of the structure was changed. Rather than supporting the weight of a single walkway, the 4th-floor skywalk now supported 2. So on that night in July 1981, with dozens of people wandering out onto the walkways in unison, it was too much. The structure fell and more than 100 people lost their lives. But even without these late changes, the construction was inherently flawed. It was found that even the independent 3rd-floor walkway was barely capable of supporting its own weight when fully loaded. That 3rd-floor walkway was dangerously close to coming down itself. The death toll that night could have been even greater. It was becoming clear that this was not simply a freak accident. It was the result of cost-cutting and lax inspections during design and construction. The collapse of the atrium roof in 1979 should have been a wake-up call. Its warnings should have been heeded. No warnings were heeded. Instead of applying more care to the task, engineering teams simply worked faster to make up for lost time. A number of investigations began, seeking to find out who was responsible. The Kansas City Star led an investigation of their own, hiring engineers and architects to get to the bottom of what led to the collapse. The Star's 16-month coverage won them a Pulitzer Prize. Official investigations from the Missouri Board of Architects, professional engineers and land surveyors, and the National Bureau of Standards pointed the finger at Jack D. Gillum, the associates, and the engineers who had signed off on the plans. They were accused of gross negligence and misconduct, but were acquitted on all charges. The firm's reputation took a huge hit, however. They lost their engineering license in both Missouri and neighboring Kansas, as well as Texas. Their membership of the American Society of Civil Engineers was revoked following the tragedy. There was more litigation to come. In a year following the collapse, more than 300 civil lawsuits flooded, demanding a total of $3 billion in compensation. In the end, $140 million was awarded to the victims. Of this money, $12 million was awarded to Sally Firestone. This was the largest single payout made to any of the victims. As Firestone required 24-hour care for the rest of her life, her needs were deemed the most serious of all the survivors. "I'm not really bitter, I'm just amazed that no one discovered the problems of the building," Sally said in 2001. So many things happened along the way that should have been caught. And of course, Sally was right. Jack D. Gillum himself would say that the error was something any first-year engineering student could spot. The problem was, it had never been checked. The Hyatt Regency walkway collapse is one of the deadliest structural failures in American history. Outside of deliberate acts of terrorist incidents, it is the worst structural collapse since the Pemberton Mill disaster more than a century and a half ago. But it's not unique. The collapse followed a spate of other disasters in the United States, including the Hartford Civic Center roof collapse in 1978 and the Kemba Arena collapse in 1979. Mercifully, neither of these incidents led to any injuries. But this just meant the structural issues were largely ignored. In the wake of the Hyatt Regency, significant changes were made to the design approval process. After the disaster, structural engineers are now responsible for reviewing all drawings and plans. Ignorance is simply not a defense anymore. Jack D. Gillam, tormented by his own failings on the project, also took it upon himself to champion the importance of checking and double-checking plans. He gave lectures to this effect at engineering conferences across the United States, stating his desire to scare the living daylights out of engineers so that they don't make the same mistakes he did. So like many tragedies, the end result may be a safer world, a world in which engineers and architects take full responsibility for the plans they sign off on. But the Hyatt Regency was just one of the buildings to emerge from that 1970s construction boom, the same boom that gave us the Hartford Center and the Kemba Arena. Many of these buildings are still in use each and every day. While most have been brought up to code, the structural deficiencies of those 1970s projects still have a lethal legacy. Also in 1981, more than 1,000 miles south of Kansas City, construction was completed on the 12-story Champlain Towers in Surfside, Florida. 40 years later, on June 24, 2021, the Champlain Towers would collapse with the loss of 98 lives. Subsequent investigations found the structure was not up to code. Things have changed since the 1970s. The design and engineering processes are greatly improved, and construction is now much safer. This is the legacy of a tragedy like the Hyatt Regency, and one of the few positives that can come from a horrific incident like this one. But the collapse at Surfside tells us something very important. Cutting corners and adopting lax approaches to safety have a lasting impact. Mistakes made in the 1970s can still claim lives and still cause misery, even more than 4 decades on.